Hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ursula. I'm an indie author of historical fiction, and I've been an avid reader since the age of 3. I'm wearing blue lipstick today in the mood of Halloween. Hopefully that makes me look a little bit less ghoulish than I did with the black lipstick before, because I don't wear traditional like red and pink lipsticks, and the few times I do wear them, they're like fun colors like blue, black, and purple. My mother has always thought I look like a vampire or some kind of zombie when I wear them. So anyway, today I'm discussing this book, which I recently read over the course of a few days. Unfortunately, it wasn't as good or as detailed as I had hoped it would be. I'm going to be mostly reading and doing some like freestyling from a blog post I've written, which should go live next month about this book. Now, this book, it was recommended to me by a library computer while I was searching for Dara Horn's recent essay collection, the provocatively titled People Love Dead Jews. I've been hearing a lot of really good things about this book, and I'm really eager to start reading it. And so it was recommended as like a similar title because, I was looking for that book, and it had a similar... Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm rambling. Since it was in that library and the blurb made it sound right up my alley, I went to look for it and assumed I would love it. And so the premise is, in 1947, while running late to a job interview, 25-year-old Eleanor Moskowitz's taxi is rear-ended by another taxi in bottleneck traffic caused by President Truman's visit to New York City. Because Eleanor suffers an injury to her face, and because cops get involved after the cabbies start arguing, she's unable to go to the interview. However, the woman in the other taxi, Patricia Bellamy, invites Eleanor to her glamorous Park Avenue apartment to calm down. Patricia does have some belated misgivings after she hears Eleanor's obviously Jewish surname, but feels it would be poor manners to rescind the invitation. When Eleanor arrives at the apartment, she meets Patricia's only child, 13-year-old Margot, a polio survivor. Margot is very understandably bitter, angry, and surly on account of her long illness and being left with a withered leg. But for some reason, she's instantly drawn to Eleanor and begs for Eleanor to become her tutor. Eleanor previously worked as a teacher, but resigned when the principal refused to punish a girl for plagiarism. She was also romantically involved with another teacher, one of the only other few Jewish teachers on the staff, and found it awkward to be around him after he started going out with the school's third Jewish teacher. And Eleanor isn't too sure about the prospect of being Margot's tutor, but ultimately agrees to do it. Now, she originally thinks, I'll just pretend to consider it, but I really don't want to do it. And then she finally agrees to do it because she feels that, Margot really needs her, and she likes the girl too. Prior to accepting the offer, she went to an unemployment agency and was advised by the woman who saw her, Rita Burns, to change her surname to something less obviously Jewish, like Moss or Morse, so her resume wouldn't be automatically thrown away. Miss Burns says she knows what she's talking about, since her real name is Rachel Bernstein. Now, I know a lot of younger people might not really understand this, and even, if you were born Jewish or converted to Judaism, have been like a member of the tribe for a very long time, you still might not really understand it if you're under a certain age. Like in the past, many Jews changed their names to look like more American or like Canadian, British, Australian, etc. And you generally didn't find that name change in immigrants of many other ethnic groups. For example, like Italians, Greeks, or Germans would frequently keep their own surnames as is, or like at most they might, change the spelling to make it a little more simplified, like more obviously easy to pronounce, or just to like anglicize it a little bit, or they would like change their first names, or, give their, children names that looked American, Canadian, British, or whatever, but they would generally not change their surnames. We find, like looking at the statistics, most people like filing name change petitions for their surnames were Jewish because, at the time it's a lot of institutionalized systemic antisemitism. There were a lot of doors closed. People wouldn't call you back for an interview. You couldn't like go to certain hotels or rent in certain apartments or go to a lot of schools if you were Jewish. So like people had to do that. Like for example, like even as late as the 60s, I was surprised to find this out when I was reading a book, and I think it was 2003. Paul Simon was initially really like nervous when like I think a record company executive suggested he and Art Garfunkel use their real surnames for their like recording, and he was like saying, "Oh, people might think we're comedians." It's like he was scared because they obviously have really, really obviously Jewish surnames, and he didn't think that would like help with their popularity if people knew they were Jewish. And another just one of many examples, my second favorite male actor of the sound era is Edward G. Robinson. I absolutely adore gangster movies, but his birth name was Emmanuel Goldenberg, and obviously if he had kept that very Jewish name, probably there would have been a lot of doors closed to him, and people wouldn't have like wanted that on the marquees. But the G in his pen name, his not his like actor name, whatever it stands for his original surname Goldenberg. So this was like reality for many people. Unfortunately, they just obediently like changed their names so they could like pass in Gentile society. And thank God that that has changed a lot in recent years. Now I'm getting on with the review. Because the Bellamy's building is restricted, Eleanor and Deeds end up pretending to have the surname Moss when she announces herself to the doorman. This charade continues when she joins the Bellamys at their summer home in Argyle, Connecticut. And it's in Argyle where all the trouble begins. Patricia's bohemian playboy brother Tom arrives for a visit, and he and Eleanor feel an immediate attraction. For many compelling reasons, Patricia is quite alarmed to discover their romantic feelings, and even more upset when she discovers Eleanor was in Tom's bed. Not only is Eleanor her employee and expected to set a good example for Margot, but she's also a good 13 years younger than Tom and of a different religion and social class. Tom is also notorious for his string of broken hearts and endless affairs, one of which ended with the woman having abortion. Now, he's never like written as like some, cad, some guy who gets off on like using women and doesn't care about them, but it's just he flits from woman to woman and has all these like different affairs and relationships, not really like thinking about long-term repercussions or how he might be emotionally hurting these women. It's just like he's genuinely clueless about this behavior. Also angry is Patricia's husband Wynne, whose many terrible qualities include anti-Semitism, sexual predation, drunkenness, classism, poor anger management, lack of success in his law firm, and hatred of modern art. He blames Eleanor for the increasing strain in his marriage and will stop at nothing to let her know who's boss and what he really thinks of her. And when Wynne crosses that line, everyone's lives are sent into even more of a tailspin. Overall, I was really disappointed in this book. While Ms. Zeldis does a superb job of describing things like interior decoration, architecture, clothes, and Manhattan streetscapes of the era, the characters all seemed kind of flat and shallow. I never truly felt in anyone's head, and the narration is rather telly instead of trusting readers to discern things for themselves. And this book also follows the trend I really find personally annoying and like overdone. Like, please just like stop this already. Like alternating POV point of view characters every other chapter, except for one time when there are two chapters in a row in Patricia's point of view, and thus like many times a revelation or cliffhanger that ends a chapter isn't followed up at all, and the resulting like reactions and events, if we know about them at all, they're just like relayed later instead of shown as they actually happen, which is like, that's, telling versus showing, when you can't, I mean, sometimes it is like, need or better for the story to have like a wraparound narrative segment, like narrating or summarizing events that, happen between chapters or scenes, because it would, significantly slow the book down or feel kind of like, why do we care about this in such great detail? But many other times you really should, just stay with the flow of the story and show like what happened next as it actually happens, instead of, oh, by the way, this happened, like dispassionately after the fact, like we've lost like caring about that by now. Just like do it with one consistent, story arc throughout, instead of constantly interrupting and then only like jumping back to that later. And, God forbid you use third-person omniscient in a book with more than one main character. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of writers, particularly younger, newer writers these days, they seem to think that's like automatically like old-fashioned or outdated, or they genuinely don't understand how you could use third-person omniscient. They think, oh, we just have to only use first-person or like alternating point of view characters. Like the worst. This isn't a third person book. It was a first person book. Andy Milligan's Trash. This was like one of the worst like books I've ever read, like with the alternating style. There were like a total of 8 first person narrators that kept like bopping along from person to person, even like multiple changes within the same chapter. It was just so hideous and stupid. Like, just get back to the classic default third person omniscient, preferably past tense. I mean, third person present tense also can work very well, but you have to be very experienced in writing past tense first before you start like getting into present tense, because it's just much harder to do correctly. And I also wish there had been more development of Eleanor's relationship with Margot, and their, I seemed like we saw it a little bit at the beginning, but then it was just like brushed over. It was just like a minor plot point to get to the real like soap opera part of the story. And without giving anything away, there's a really convenient Deus Ex Machina plot development for one of the storylines. And I agree with them. There were several reviewers on Amazon and Goodreads who feel like this is a YA book that just happens to have adult characters. It really did have that, kind of feeling to it. I mean, if you want to write a YA book, just write a YA book, or if you want to write an adult book, don't you just write an adult book. Don't like, try to play it both ways, decide like which audience you really want to write for and stick with, a storyline and writing style that befits that, age range and what you're telling. Don't just, try to like hop around for like try to play it with both people. I was also hoping for a more thorough, engrossing exploration of the institutionalized systemic anti-Semitism which continued even after the Shoah, and beyond like alternatingly heavy-handed and minor mentions every so often. Like for example, in the beginning when she meets Margot, Margot repeats some like anti-Semitic crap her father has been saying, like claiming we're all like rich and powerful, and she repeats the deicide charge, and Eleanor like immediately like educates her and gets her to like magically change her mind with like a really rehearsed sounding explanation, like saying why we did not kill Jesus, and like most Jews are not rich and don't have much like power at all. I mean, that just doesn't feel believable. You don't sweep away like long ingrained thoughts and prejudices and irrational beliefs overnight, even if you explain very well. So I mean, that just didn't feel done very well. And Eleanor is also very secular and assimilated, with almost no connection to either religious or cultural aspects of Judaism. I'd been hoping she'd been a little more religious. I mean, obviously, given the era and time, I wasn't particularly expecting her to be, full-blown Orthodox or even like old-style conservative, because in those days, many people associated more religiosity with like their parents or grandparents in the old country, and they wanted to like shed it and like to become more, let's prove we're like real Americans or Canadians or British or whoever. We're not those like icky people clinging to those stupid, silly, old-fashioned, old world things. And it's only been, in the last few decades, more people have begun, embracing greater religiosity within Judaism, not just in Orthodoxy, but in conservative and even the Reform movement as well. And it does feel really out of character when Eleanor visits a mikveh, not to mention contrary to norms of halacha, which is Jewish law, literally means the way to walk. Now, if you don't know, a mikveh is a ritual bath. It's sort of like a tiny little swimming pool. Women traditionally will use it when they're spiritually purifying themselves after 7 clean days have passed after their menstrual period, so they can resume relations with their husbands, or I guess like in more progressive denominations with their wives, or sometimes even with partners they're just living with and not officially married to yet. And you also obviously will use a mikveh for conversion, and sometimes women will visit it to like spiritually purify themselves before Yom Kippur, and many very religious men will use it throughout the year, like to purify themselves before prayer. And there's also like a smaller mikveh you can use for toveling dishes and glasses and tableware and cookware. You just like put it in a little basket and like spiritually cleanse and purify things you're going to use in your kosher kitchen. But anyway, and you would not have used a mikveh in that era if you were unmarried. I mean, I know there are some mikvaot now in the present, like particularly progressive ones, that will do like a ceremony, like for example marking menopause or like a very significant event in your life. Eleanor uses it to heal because when attempted to rape her, he didn't actually get very far, but she feels very like shaken up and ruined, and she wants to cleanse herself in the mikveh. But that's just not something you would have seen in like the Orthodox world at the time. And also you don't traditionally recite the blessings for immersing yourself if you're not going there for conversion or purifying yourself for to resume relations with your spouse after you've been menstruating. So that's also not really something that I felt to be like either religiously or historically believable. Now, obviously, anti-Semites don't care how religious or secular someone is, but Eleanor never demonstrates a strong or believable Jewish identity. The distinction between her and the Bellamys feels more believably based on class instead of religion. And also her relationship with Tom and their supposed chemistry never felt believable to me, coupled with how rare and scandalous interdating and intermarriage were in that era. Eleanor only thinks about how she'll be excluded from Tom's Gentile world, not about things like how they'd raise potential kids. And like also the pretty big age difference between them is like at best like minorly mentioned a few times. It's not delved into like in great depth at all. I mean, obviously 13 years isn't that big of an age difference anymore by the time you're 25 and 38, but it still like at least merits a bit of a mention, because many people would be like initially taken aback to discover someone's that much older, and contrary to what many people like insist over and over again, that was absolutely not the norm in most eras and societies. Most, if you look at like the statistics of marriages, most couples were about 1 to 6 years apart. It was extremely unusual for them to be like 10, 15, 20 years apart. That was considered quite scandalous. And though it was slightly more common among like royalty and the very wealthy, that was still not something that was like constantly happening all the time. Like all these fools make it seem like, oh, people every day were like, men in their 30s were marrying 16-year-old girls. And everyone thought that was totally normal. It absolutely was not. It's like a complete bogus urban legend and completely not in touch with history. The treatment of premarital sex also felt a bit unrealistic and ahistorical. Outside of really bohemian types, which Eleanor isn't depicted as at all, it generally was only done by couples planning to marry anyway in this era, not couples only thinking of a good time and unsure of their relationship's future. And obviously, another big reason premarital sex generally wasn't engaged in by anyone but couples who were like engaged already or very serious about their relationship and planning, hoping to be married within the near future, is because, if the woman got in trouble, as they called it, became pregnant out of wedlock, they could just, speed the wedding up considerably or just, pretend, usually not very well, the baby was premature. Like in those days, you just didn't like, have sex with someone you weren't planning a future with if you had to do it outside of marriage at all. This wasn't necessarily because like people believed it was like the moral, like religious proper thing to do to wait until marriage. It was because if you got pregnant before you were married, that was like a huge scandal. You just didn't do that. There were so many big repercussions for that, and unfortunately, not through like real ignorance or anything. I just think many young people today under the age of 40 or so, they don't really understand what it was like in that era. They've always grown up and taken for granted, oh, people just can casually like live together and have kids without being married and just like date for 5+ years, not even consider marriage. They don't understand what it was like, even like within many people's lifetimes now. That was like something you just absolutely did not do, and they just don't understand, what could have happened if the wrong person found out or like the supposed wrong thing happened. And also, I also found out the author herself is intermarried, so perhaps that's also why she portrays it in the way she does, like not a big deal. I mean, there was a very, very, very small intermarriage rate in that era among all people, and even like people of the same religion would tend to stay within their own ethnic group. Like Irish people of Irish descent would marry like other Irish Americans, like Scandinavian Americans would marry other people of Scandinavian descent. Like Germans and Italians and Syrians or Lebanese Turks, all sorts of people just would stay within their own ethnic group, and it's not like a racial thing at all. If I'm blessed with a husband, Baruch Hashem, please let it happen. I wouldn't care what color his skin is or what his ethnic national origin is, as long as he's Jewish. So it's not a racial thing; it's just a religious thing. We want someone we can share our religion with and raise kids in a unified home, and it's very difficult to do that if like the partners aren't both Jewish. It sends like confusing mixed messages to children, but that's a whole topic for a whole other time. And did I mention the book just kind of ends in media res? Like it was just a really stupid ending. It just sort of ends right where it is. I really didn't like that at all. And so thank you for listening to my vlog. I hope I haven't been too rambling. I'm still trying to grow in my confidence when I do this, and I have some very good news. If all goes according to plan, tomorrow I will finally be having my navel re-pierced, and hopefully they'll say I'm a good candidate, even though I'm rejected the first time around due to extreme weight loss and some other health issues I was having. This is what it was originally pierced with. It's a purple opal. My wonderful piercer back in Albany, New York, helped me to pick it out. It looks better when it's like in better sunlight. Unfortunately, it's been a bit like overcast today, and I will ask them to help me choose something like that, similar to that, if they say I'm a good candidate. But if not, and I will respect their professional judgment, I will have my left conch pierced as like my second choice. And so hopefully I will probably see you on Sunday with another vlog. I might be discussing one of my own books then, or perhaps another topic. So thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing if you like my content.